Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how to attract venture capital. This is part of our University Startup Development webinar series. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that, as I mentioned earlier, that this is part of a series. For September, we have two more webinars lined up, and we have a schedule coming up for October and November. If you are already registered to this webinar series, you need not register again. However, you'll be receiving updates about the webinar schedule as well as the video and slide archives via email. So please check your inboxes for emails from us. So on September 13, we'll be talking about market validation on how to justify the decision to start a new venture. And on September 20th, we're talking about collaborating with corporate partners. There will be Q&A at the end. So if you have questions for our speaker this afternoon, simply type in your question in the questions box of your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll take your questions towards the end of the webinar this afternoon. The slides and video recording are also available. They will be made available 24 to 48 hours after the webinar concludes. Again, the information of the slides and the video will be sent to you via email. So please check your inboxes. If you can't wait for the email, all you need to do is go to nced2.org/webinars to see all the archived recordings as well as the slide downloads for this webinar series as well as previous series that we've done before. Today's webinar agenda, we'll talk about what this series is about, and we always encourage our attendees to invite their colleagues to join this webinar series if they find it very useful or if they find the information useful to them. We'll also talk about, give you a background on the Startup Development Program, basically what this webinar series is based on. And the third item in our agenda is how to attract venture capital. It's basically our topic for today. Then after that, we'll have Q&A towards the end. All right, so before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that, this series will feature topics of, from creating a business plan to attracting VCs as well as, validation term sheets. So we are looking at this series and catering to those who would want to run or create their own startup. So if you are one of those people, if you're an entrepreneur or researcher who would like to run or create their own startup, this webinar series would be a good resource for you to explore, not just you, but your colleagues as well. So if you go to this website, you'll find it under our webinars page, under the first heading. You'll see upcoming topics in this series. This schedule on the right will be updated as soon as we confirm more sessions in the future. If you look at the completed webinars part, you'll see the archives where we store the slides as well as the video recordings. You can also watch them on the page itself on the right. All right, so now we'll go over to our speakers this afternoon. So we are talking to, we have two speakers on. So the first speaker is our Executive Director, Tony Stanko, and he'll talk about the Startup Development Program. And Steve Sokoloff, he's an NCED2 Startup Development Officer as well as the Managing Partner of Tech Council Ventures. He will talk about how to attract VCs or how to attract VC investments. So at this point, I'll turn it over now to Tony to talk about the background of the Startup Development Program.
Okay, thank you so much, Rhea. Welcome, everyone. So this Startup Development Program is where we are as part of this commercialization model that is a response to a congressional ask a couple of years ago in 2015, and our corporate members came up with a model that brings together a lot of the players and lines it up to the IPO market and to their M&A market. So you can see the timeline there. I won't spend too much time on that. Let's go on to the next. So this is the model in graphical form, and you can see it's pretty complicated. This part is in the private funding cloud. There's a VC bubble there, that's what Steve is going to talk about as one of the SDOs. The SDO program is overarching and kind of links up a lot of the arrows that go from one box to another. All right, next. So Congress, the background here is Congress funds $137 billion of federally funded research at universities and federal labs. And, you know, everybody wants to see more startups, more jobs, more economic development around that. Universities, Congress, corporates, entrepreneurs, angels, VCs. So everybody in that previous graphic kind of agrees that, you know, it's important to develop that R&D. This is a great opportunity for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial researchers to build startup around IP. And universities, so talk to your university, they have programs around that. Talk to your tech transfer office. So internally at the university, there's a lot of things, a lot of assets that can help you. But we can help you with the startup development officers and with our Fortune 500 members that'll tell you what they're interested in if you're trying to get exits to them or work for them or, you know, other partner with them. So that's what the SDO program is about, and the commercialization model on our side. Next. So the development officers in particular, if you're creating a startup, will help you line it up to the IPO and corporate M&A market and help you with some specific items, you know, going from the research to, you know, a big exit. Next slide. In particular, they'll help you, you know, as an early management team, create the business plan that lines up to markets, which is that's not a trivial piece, right? A lot of startups fail because there's nobody that, you know, at the end of the day is interested in what they're doing. So having the market alignment is a big improvement to what's out there. But that market alignment then needs to be consolidated into a business plan, and the skills will help you with that. And then basically the levels are to go from proof of concept out of the research to prototyping to early product development. And then once you get to product development and then product sales, angels and VCs will definitely help at that point. So we're trying to, with this program, bridge the valley of death, as it's called, to get it to the you know, angels and VCs. You can look at this as experiments, commercialization experiments. So you get to work with Fortune 500 angels, VCs, and serial entrepreneurs to take the research and do these experiments to see if anybody is going to be interested in, you know, can you get past, you know, some of the technical risks, some of the science risks to a product and to sales of that product. All right, next. So the benefits to the researchers and the startups, the faculty, the students, the entrepreneurs, is you have access through our program to these highly talented, experienced startup development officers who basically fall into three buckets. They're either ex-corporates, angels and VCs like Steve today and Foz last week if you're on the call, and serial entrepreneurs that have been there, done that, and can help you kind of navigate some of the trouble parts. Universities get to move the IP, and everybody's interested in moving that IP, commercializing that research that's federally funded. So that's a benefit for the university. And also, it's an opportunity to have graduated students actually work with Fortune 500 angels, VCs, and create their own startups. The real model here, and I think we're going to get into this in a later webinar, is it's to graduate the students, the research students, into their own startups that could help move some of this research closer to the market. All right, next. If you have research that you'd like to put into a startup, or if you have an early startup and you'd like the SDOs to help you, just contact us at support@set2.org and we'll start the process. All right, next. And I think this is where we move it on to Steve. So Steve Sokoloff, as we mentioned, is a SDO and has a lot of experience in the venture world. Steve?
Thanks, Tony. This is Steve Sokoloff, and appreciate the opportunity to speak here for a little while about venture capital. I have been a venture capitalist for about 20 years now. I actually started out my career as a corporate venture capitalist with Lucent Technologies, and was in large part commercializing through spin out technology from Bell Labs into new startups. I then launched a firm called New Venture Partners and spent about 15 years investing in the US and Europe, primarily in tech transfer opportunities out of corporate and academic institutions. And recently joined and now managing partner with Tech Council Ventures, which is an East Coast based fund with a strategy to invest in the growing number of early stage opportunities emanating in the Mid-Atlantic region on the East Coast, as I think is true of many regions across the country. I got to know NSET2 and Tony a few years ago because I liked his idea for trying to bring corporates closer to the universities to identify and vet good ideas. And over the last couple of years, as he's evolved to the demo days, trying to highlight the best startups from across the university campuses and bring in angels and VCs and the corporates, and then developing this group of startup development officers that can actually help work with the startups to mature them. So I think it's been a good evolving model for university startup commercialization. So Tony asked me to talk a little about raising capital from VCs. And so let me provide a little context about the venture capital industry and some stats on what venture capitalists are investing in. And then I'll talk about the characteristic of opportunities that make venture capital an appropriate and timely source of funding. And then ideas for how do you go find VCs, how do you get the hook in, how do you get their attention and interest, and then how do you work with them to build the relationship that hopefully eventually leads to an investment. So let me start just by characterizing venture capitalists in contrast to other funding sources. And so when you're first starting out your business, you have your first idea. It's often friends and family that you turn to help develop that first idea. And those people generally are close and known relationships and typically not professional investors, and they might invest a few tens of thousands, generally I'll say less than $100,000 in helping you get launched. Then there are angels, and I'll also put in a similar category accelerators and incubators, but these tend to be local individuals or groups who will, I'll call them semi-professional to professional, who will often invest somewhere between 100,000 and $1 million and work with you through the early to seed stage of your idea development and product development. There are, of course, grants available from both, generally federal and state levels. So at a federal level, you've got SBIRs, for example. At a state level, you often have economic development grants or some other sources of funding, and those can be good for 100,000 or more. But then we get to the venture capitalists, who really are institutional professional investors and generally belong to venture capital firms and are investing assets under management that are generally other people's money that the venture capitalists are investing on their behalf. And they'll generally invest $1 million plus, and that can go up significantly. So there's a good number of venture capitalists out there. So there are over 800, probably almost 900 active venture capital firms in the US market today, with over $300 billion of assets under management. So there is a significant amount of capital available to help grow and scale your business from these professional investors. And here on this chart, there's a distribution of the firms by assets under management. So you can see there are a few firms that are very large, $1 billion plus in assets under management. So these would be firms with brand names like Andreessen Horowitz, Kleiner Perkins, Sequoia, New Enterprise Associates, etc. But there's also quite a few smaller firms in the market. I think the median assets under management for venture capital firms is around 75 million. And in particular, when you get outside the large markets of Northern California and the Boston area, most of the firms tend to be on the smaller side. So you've got a lot of capital out there available if you can attract it. Now that's a big if, and I'll talk some more about the challenge of raising money from venture capitalists. But again, on this chart, VCs invested about $70 billion in about 8,000 deals in 2016. You can see that was a little bit of a downtick from the prior 2 years, but the last 3 years have been a significant increase over the prior decade. And I'll say that the decade from early to mid 2000s, after that dot-com crash in 2001, it's taken a good 10 years to build up to this level of investing activity again. So again, there's a fair amount of activity in the market, a significant amount of capital being invested, and a significant number of deals. But let me say that this is a count of individual VC investors. So I mentioned 800 to 900 firms. So there's probably among those firms a little over 2,000 active venture capital investors. And in the last year, you can see that second bar. So this is the number of active first round investors. So these are investors in opportunities that are receiving their first institutional capital. So you can see that about a third of the active investors out there are doing new deals. And the other 2/3 are primarily managing existing portfolio companies and investing follow-on rounds in those existing startups. So it's one of the things that you have to keep in mind in terms of looking for VC investment is you've got to find VCs who have appetite, are open and interested in investing in new deals, and are not, and don't have a fairly full plate managing existing deals. And then just to make a similar point, out of the 2,000 plus VC investors out there, there's probably less than a quarter of those that would be life science investors, for example. So to make another point of, you have to start to think about who are the VCs that would be right for the sector that your opportunity falls in. So in 2016, there were a little over 2,000 first financings. So if I go back to my comment about 8,000 venture capital deals last year, this means that about a quarter of those deals were first financings, companies raising their first institutional capital from venture capitalists. So 3/4 of those deals were basically follow-on rounds in existing startups. So again, still a fair amount of activity, but narrowing down to a more focused pool of investors and opportunities. And I don't have any statistics on how many opportunities looked for venture capital, but you'd find a lot of VCs saying that they looked at hundreds or even thousands of deals to find one or a couple that they invested in. So 2,000 new financings, sounds like a pretty significant number, and I think it is. But it's probably a small fraction of the number of opportunities that solicited or looked for venture capital. You can see by these charts on the left, about 3/4 of those deals were angel or seed rounds, meaning that those companies probably were still in some form of product development or very early revenue. So VCs will invest at a fairly early stage. Less than 1/4 of the deals were what we call early VC, where these are companies in revenue, showing growth and then seeking their first VC capital. And then a small sliver of folks who probably were able to build their business to a significant level before reaching out to venture capital for probably an expansion stage or late growth stage investment. And then on the right, you can see the sectors that those first financings occurred in. So you can see the largest parts of that pie, or the largest part of that pie is software deals. And that probably is both consumer and enterprise software opportunities. The next big part is what is called other there, which probably is a collection of things like industrial opportunities, maybe some Internet of Things opportunities, and a collection of other things, maybe some education, for example. And then after that, smaller slivers in energy, pharma, hardware, healthcare devices and services, areas, all of which are, probably in contrast, a little bit more out of favor these days. There are investors almost everywhere across the country. I see there are a few states that don't have any recorded active investors in them, but generally there's investors, distributed, across the country. You can see obviously California has a preponderance, but there's local investors almost everywhere, and many of these investors, will travel, particularly for opportunities that are a little bit later stage. People, will probably travel less for the most early stage opportunities, but willing to travel, once they see opportunities that are showing early signs of traction and growth and to a VC's eye, getting more exciting. I'd also like to bring up that over the last few years, there's been a real growth of active corporate venture capitalists. So these would be venture capital arms of corporations. And these span now almost every sector there is, from starting in technology sectors, but including consumer products, utilities, media, financial services, etc. And by these statistics, almost 1,000 active corporate investors over the last year. So they've become a more important part of the venture capital landscape, and represent probably 15 to 20% of all venture capital deals out there now, and probably a higher proportion, probably closer to 25% of the money in venture capital. So they've become a pretty significant part of the venture capital ecosystem, and definitely a group of folks who you might think about as potential investors in your opportunities. And there are good reasons, both for their interest and for your interest in working with corporates. So, on the corporate side, they're looking for great new ideas that can affect their business. They want to explore new markets. They want to find new products or services that they can bring through their channels to their existing customers. Many opportunities, to the corporates help build capabilities, whether they be marketing capabilities or financial or supply chain or other operational capabilities. Many of the corporate VCs are also investing to expand their ecosystem. So one of the biggest corporate VCs out in the market is Intel Capital, who invests a substantial amount of their capital in deals that help create a market for their processor and other businesses. And then occasionally they'll look for opportunities also to take their own technology and commercialize it through spin-out. And on the side of the portfolio companies, you can benefit from the resources and leverage of the corporate partner, by leveraging their channels through to their customers, by leveraging their market intelligence and expertise, accessing resources that can help with product development or engineering or manufacturing, and even through their investment, leverage their financial resources to help scale the business. So good reasons to think about corporate VCs as well as traditional financial VCs as potential investment partners. So what are VCs looking for? This is pretty basic perspective, but it reigns true. They want to invest in business opportunities that can generate wealth at scale. So they want businesses that obviously can be very profitable, can be sustainable, and can grow, into multi-hundred-million-dollar businesses. So obviously behind that, to provide that room for growth, there needs to be evidence of a large and growing market that the opportunity can ride. And there has to be a strong belief in the team's ability to execute. So looking at the experience that the team has in the sector that they're pursuing, looking at signs of talent on the team that they bring to it, and the team's ability to learn and build, and what the team has demonstrated in terms of their flexibility and ability to react and figure out the market and build the right set of talent on the team. They want sustainable advantage, often found through intellectual property, but also it could be through just great execution and seizing market share early and creating strong brand early. And then, those first 4 points are all, kind of story at first. And so, the next bullet point, signs of success. They have to see some signs that, the story is real and has some traction. So traction that demonstrates real customer interest, a real willingness to pay on the part of customers, and a successful business model, one that shows profitability and growth opportunity. So even though earlier I said 3/4 of first financings in venture deals were angel and seed stage, I think, and particularly recently, there's still a strong look for the first revenues as a way of demonstrating, the success of the model and the reality of the model. And then VCs, they have to see a path to liquidity and see how they generate a return on their investment. And they want to go in thinking this could be a 10 times return in 3 to 5 years. So it's got to have that kind of potential return on capital invested. VCs do think in themes, and they do want to jump on hot markets and avoid markets they see as challenging. So just for a little bit of top of mind list here, some hot areas for VC investment these days include autonomous vehicles and the technology that goes into them, AI and machine learning. So this notion of collecting data, often massive amounts of data, and being able to search it and learn from it in a way to improve and even automate business processes or consumer decision-making processes. has been a pretty hot topic. Augmented or virtual reality. Consumer brands, I think, is relatively new in the last few years, but the success of brands like Allbirds and Shoes, or Peloton and Exercise at Home, or The Honest Company in consumer products, or Casper in bedding, have all demonstrated the potential value of strong consumer branding success. Digital health, given all the changes in the healthcare system and all of that, there's a lot of opportunity around improving business processes through digital health opportunities. Drones has been exciting as a new means for information gathering, as well as now potential security, delivery, and other applications. Fintech has generally had some level of interest, but recently, with the advent of Bitcoin and blockchain technologies, has gotten a lot of attention. Gaming and esports, software as a service, I think, as a business model, has been around for a while, but continues to be a business model of interest. And then security, often cybersecurity, but tied to both networks and now as well the Internet of Things, vehicles, etc., is all pretty hot. On the other side, I think that applications for phones has become pretty saturated. Hardware opportunities like ASICs and other networking kinds of hardware has gotten tough from a perspective of capital and return. Pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, basically sectors that generally represent significant capital requirements and have produced kind of challenging or disappointing returns in the last years. So, how to find the VCs that might be relevant to your opportunity. So, first I'll say, cold calls and mass mailings are likely to be ignored. You really want to find a way to reach out personally to VCs that are likely to have a real interest in your opportunity. So do the research to identify those likely investors. Figure out who's in your geography, who's investing at your stage, who's interested in your sector. And look for relationship links. Try to find that personal connection, sometimes through schools, maybe through your advisor network, etc. There are some good online research sources. CB Insights is a good industry analyst in the venture capital market. Dow Jones Venture Source tracks venture capital investment. The National Venture Capital Association, obviously membership association of the venture capitalists, and TechCrunch is a pretty good open online source. And then I'm sure you all have plenty of good local resources, whether they be local venture capital associations, often statewide or regional, local angel groups in most communities. There are often venture fairs once or a few times a year in each market that show off, the good local opportunities and tend to attract a good number of VCs interested in that market. The accelerators, incubators, there's a tremendous growth of co-working spaces now. Many of them offer, as part of their value proposition, a network to VCs, and so take advantage of that. University startup officers, will have a network to VCs, interested in opportunities from the university. So again, as I said at the beginning, find that personal connection. Network through your advisors, through your board members. This is a role that the NSET startup development officers can also play in helping you find your way to the right VCs. The first contact is really critical. VCs are making new investments, As I said earlier, they're spending a lot of time typically managing existing investments, and depending on their fund, where they are in their fund life cycle, they can be out focused on raising capital. In addition, the ones even that have appetite to make new investments, as I said, they're receiving hundreds or even thousands of solicitations to make 1 or 2 investments per year. So getting them to spend time on your opportunity is the first challenge, because they've all got very full plates. And that first elevator pitch or your pitch book is a critical first step to seizing their attention. So you really need to do a good job of highlighting, what is the product and market description and fit that you're going after with your opportunity. What is a valuable problem being addressed or solved? So oftentimes people say painkillers and not vitamins. So you need to be solving a real problem. How big is the market and what's your go-to-market strategy? Highlight the experience and strength of the team, and flash those signs of success. Whatever signs of market traction or early partnerships or revenues that you can point to. So all of that critical to getting their first attention. And again, your advisors, the startup development officers, et cetera, can help you kind of put that story together. So if you can get their attention, then you go into a period of due diligence that can take several months. And this is where they'll really study the opportunity, understand you as a team, and figure out if this makes sense for them. So they'll want to test the value proposition. They will leverage their network for perspective on the opportunity. Many VCs will often have you talk to other portfolio companies if they have portfolio companies in the same or similar sector. They'll want to call your customer or partner references and hear from them. And they may engage experts to advise them on particularly technical aspects of your product. They'll, over this period, want to get comfortable with the team and its ability to execute. So they'll check team references. They'll want to know your advisors. And in large part, they want to create a set of interactions that help build a relationship and gain trust in listening, learning, and team building. And this goes both ways. This is an opportunity for you to get to know the VCs as well as for them to get to know you. And so, this does, in part come down to chemistry. A venture capital investment, represents a relationship that can take easily, 3 to 5 years, and often, 10 plus years. So the chemistry that you're going to have to work together over that kind of time, and often through, pretty challenging business times, is critical. And VCs want to know where their investment takes them. So they'll want to map their investment versus your spending plan over time. They want to map their investment versus key milestones or value inflection points over time, and certainly want to understand anticipated future capital needs and what it will take to bring the opportunity to success and liquidity for them. So again, having guides like the startup development officers involved to prepare you for this due diligence process and help you through it can be very helpful. And finally, if due diligence succeeds, then the VCs will discuss deal terms and/or present a term sheet. And that would reflect the amount and the terms under which they would propose investing in the opportunity. It will determine the valuation and treatment of any prior ownership and investment. So if you have any friends and family or angels in the deal, or even the treatment of founders' equity in the deal. And also the terms will address issues of governance and risk management. So meaning, how would the board be constituted? Who would be on the board? what decisions might the VC investors have a say-so or often a veto over, or issues of risk management. If something goes awry, what are some of the things that could happen? VCs may or may not be offering to fully fund the opportunity. So if you've got, some of the VCs on the right-hand side of that distribution of assets under management, they may want to come in and do the whole deal themselves. But oftentimes you have smaller VCs who may not want or be able to afford in their funds, the whole amount of the funds that you're trying to raise, or they may not want to take the risk of being the only investor in the deal. And so that term sheet may just be a starting point to which you'll need to seek additional sources of capital to join in around. There may be some flexibility to discuss or negotiate terms, and depending on the VC, and also, and sort of obviously, this can depend on how competitive the opportunity is. So having 2 term sheets is a lot better than having 1 term sheet, and gives you a chance to have a little bit more leverage in negotiating key terms or valuations. And again, use experienced advisors to help navigate this part of the process. And, that could be your lawyers, make sure they're experienced with venture deals, or the startup development officers or other advisors that you have around. So that kind of brings me to the end of my prepared comments, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Steve. I'm showing now the first set of questions. Okay, so I have on my screen now the first question. How critical are patents to the VCs? Do VCs require international patents for technologies, e.g. solar cell technologies?
Yeah, I think VCs, particularly in more technical opportunities, are very interested in the protection around the technology. Also, patents can be, not only a defensive source of value, but can be an offensive source of value, sometimes in generating additional income or capital for the startup opportunity, and also more value potentially in an M&A transaction. So patents are important, and oftentimes, a count alone can be valuable. VCs, will often try to understand key patents that have, broad claims on core aspects of the opportunity. And I think the patents, generally more important to cover the markets that you intend to do business in. So, U.S. patents on solar cell technologies, example, for markets in the U.S., but, obviously if you want to, do business in Europe or Asia, then having international patents can be valuable as well. And, there's a call to be made, of course, in the cost of prosecution and maintenance of patents. So you try to pick the geographies that you think will be valuable to your business.
All right, thank you, Steve. Our next question is, I think this question might be good for Tony to answer. Tony, are you there? Are there services available that will help students and faculty determine realistic values for license terms? I know of some databases, but our school doesn't have any access to them as they're costly. Can these be obtained through NCET too? Tony, are you there? Maybe this question is for you.
Sure, I'm here. So realistic licensing terms, I mean, really, investors are interested in paying. I've actually seen a lot of deals fall apart because the terms from the university were unrealistic, and therefore, people just walked away In some cases, it was corporates. In some cases, it was investors, angels, and VCs. So realistic is, it's not going to a database. It's actually finding a customer, as in any market. It's all about the customers and who's willing to pay. And so if somebody's willing to pay, then it's realistic. And if somebody isn't willing to pay, it's not realistic. And there's no sense of trying to convince somebody by pointing to databases. If you're looking for ranges, yes, there are some databases. Autumn has some good ones, and there's other people out there, some paid databases. But at the end of the day, it's you gotta just negotiate. And the biggest part is actually finding anybody that cares. And once you have somebody that cares, for the most part, it's better to do a deal than not do a deal, at least in my opinion. But people have different views on that, because the chances are it's more likely you're not going to have a deal than you will have a deal. Steve, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think you make a good point on, I have seen some universities, create challenges in deals through the license terms. I think most universities are coming around to, the value of the startup opportunity and what that can lead to, and recognize that oftentimes, being willing to or motivated to create more startups and enlarge the pie that way can be better than maybe trying to maximize the value on every individual license. So I think, trying to find some more standardized approaches and terms, that are reasonable, is a good approach. I haven't really seen databases for license terms, but I think, enough people have enough of an anecdotal sample set to be able to provide guidance here. So I think, most of the tech transfer offices in the universities, have experience. There's certainly a network through like Licensing Executive Society. I'm sure that Tony's organization can provide some data, as at least anecdotal data as well. And there's a fair number of papers and books out there on licensing that do a pretty good job about talking about kind of standard, or let's call it average terms, and ways to think about, valuing IP and, in creating license terms.
Okay, we actually have 12 questions still in the queue. So maybe we can go through them as quickly as we can. Yeah. So our next question is, what's the split between tech and life science investments?
That's a good question. I think that if you think about life science as, pharma and biotech, rather than sort of healthcare, digital healthcare technologies or even devices, then probably the pharma and biotech are a little bit out of favor these days, just because of the capital intensity and the challenge of success. And that's an area that, because of the capital intensity, it's an area that's particularly gotten the attention of the pharma corporate venture capitalists. So that's one where, if you're in the life science space, an area where I would definitely look quickly to the corporates to see whether there's interest in opportunity for support there. So I think, the pure kind of pharma biotech are probably, I think if I think back to that pie chart, probably on the order of kind of 15% of the pie. And I guess you could almost call tech everything else. So maybe it's 3 to 1 or 4 to 1 tech to life science.
All right, our next question is, where do I find a collated list of the 800 to 900 VC firms available, their asset levels, and actively looking for new deals in our sector?
The NVCA has a pretty good collated list. To be honest, I'm not sure if that list is made public to non-members or not, but starting with a member could help you get at that list. Also, folks like CB Insights and Venture Source publish open newsletters that you can read, and they'll identify VCs investing in different sectors. Also, TechCrunch is an open source resource that has done a pretty good job of collating the VCs and their investments. So those are all pretty good resources to use.
Okay, our next question is, can you give some examples of how company culture changes when outside investors step in?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. I guess the most dramatic or what change that stands out for me is that when you go to VC investors, and I'll translate your outside investors to VC investors as opposed to maybe earlier stage friends and family or angels. But I think the VC investors, they're more professional generally. They have more deal experience generally, and they're more focused on the kind of success that they need for their institutional capital. And so, if a founder team is succeeding, tremendously well on its own, the VCs might be more hands-off and leave the founding team to build their culture and grow as they have been successfully. But a VC is also going to, often and particularly, help shape the opportunity, to achieve the kind of growth and success that they're looking for, and that they hope the founders are aligned and interested in looking for as well. And so part of that might be, more professionalizing the team, looking to bring in talent, for example, stronger marketing talent that might already exist, or stronger engineering or product development talent that might already exist, or some more senior leadership that is, can help scale the company. So I think, those are the things that drive the culture change, from sort of an early collaborative, cohesive, relatively small founding team to something that's growing, more professional, bringing in additional talent, et cetera.
Okay, our next question is, how often do VCs require a renegotiation of a university license agreement as a condition for the investment?
I'd be interested in Tony's answer to this, or even others who are on the call. Personally, what I found is that the license deal is not baked when I get involved. So there may have been discussions, or there may be some standard approaches or a boilerplate, but the deal isn't closed at the time that I get involved with it. So I'd say rarely have I needed to renegotiate the license. And I can probably think of, if I've done 70 or 80 deals in my mind, probably less than a handful of times have I renegotiated the license.
Yeah, so this is related to the previous question that I answered. Licensing is the main way universities have a stake in the startup, and that's a good thing because that's how the technologies get transferred. to the startup. Um, I don't say I wouldn't say I have a percentage, but I think universities are getting much better at having terms that are market ready and market acceptable. So if anything, I think this is happening less and less, though it still happens more than you would like. And most of the time, people just won't invest, right? I mean, you won't even have an opportunity to renegotiate, just because VCs look at so many deals, and it's pretty rare that any one deal is so, out of the park that people will, not just go to the next one if it's too complicated. So that's the negative. The positive is, express licenses are more common. More universities are trying to do just a minimal licensing deal and get things really at the back end. The whole key behind any kind of venture investment startup deal is to align interests. So if the license is aligned so that the university benefits, if the startup benefits and the investors benefit, most people don't have a problem with that. It's when the university tries to get upfront cash from a startup that is looking for cash from investors who are looking for returns is usually where you have the stumble. That's probably the biggest area where things just fall apart. It's less likely that it's a term of percentages, where if the company is hugely successful, the university is trying to get a large amount that people don't feel is appropriate. That's less likely to happen, because if you have winners, it's there's enough for everybody, and universities generally are pretty reasonable on that front. It's really the cash versus deferred income and lining up between the different players on the startup. Ria, do you want to wrap it up? I think we're at 2 here.
Yes, I think that's all the time we have today. So again, I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tony, for joining us today. And I'd like to thank the audience for joining us this afternoon. Again, I've been getting questions about slides and video. You can go directly to the page of the webinar series. I'm showing it on the screen now. So if there's anyone interested in the slides and video, it'll be posted 24 to 48 hours on this page under completed webinars. If you can't find the page, you will receive an email from us with the links on how to go to the archives using the email that you used to register for this webinar. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. And our next webinar in this series is Market Validation with Adam Greenspan and Tony Stanko also. So that's on September 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. Thank you everyone for joining us, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Ria. Thank you, Steve.